Okay, so in this short video, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about your essays. Essay number one. I've had a couple of students who want a little bit more information about the expectations for the essays, so I thought I would talk a little bit about that. So yeah, this is your basic, these are sort of general questions. I expect you guys to sort of make them your own, add your own interpretations, develop a thesis based on some of these prompts or one of these prompts that I've given for you. So just to read the instructions, so for this assignment, students will write a literary essay following the formal conventions of an academic essay, including introduction with a thesis statement, body paragraphs, quotations from the text, conclusion, and a works cited page. So just make sure your essay has all of those components. Your introductory paragraph is the one that has the thesis statement in it, and your thesis statement is going to be your argument where you express what it is that you're going to talk about in those pages. And your body paragraphs are where you're going to add quotations from the text. You're going to prove your argument using evidence, details from whatever text that you've selected, and you're going to explain why those quotations are evidence to prove your thesis. So that's where you do most of your arguing, is in the body paragraphs. And then you use your conclusion to reiterate, restate your thesis, and also make any kind of broader insights about the meaning or any kind of insightful reflections that you might have after finishing your paper. And then, of course, your works cited page is mandatory. So this is an MLA style, and I do expect you guys to be able to, um, Google MLA reference style if you don't have your grammar handbook with you, and make sure you recognize the proper way of citing a poem or a selection. So if you have any questions about that, I can also answer by email. The length for this one is 1,000 words. If you go a little bit over, that's perfectly fine. Usually I say, like, if you're 15% over, like an extra page, that's fine. I'm not going to worry about those people who are a little bit over the word count. If you're way under the word count, I'm a little bit more concerned with that. So if your paper is only, 500 words, then you might maybe not developing enough of your argument, or there's not enough detail or analysis of the text in there. So you want to try to hit that 1,000-word mark if you can. And yeah, you're going to turn in your paper with the Turnitin uploading system. So yeah, you'll be able to upload your paper, and then I'll be able to receive it that way. If for some reason the Turnitin doesn't work for you, make sure you are emailing it to me before the deadline. So the deadline's July 17th at say midnight. And I'd prefer a Word document, so Microsoft Word document, not a PDF. So Microsoft Word doc, that's what I would prefer. It's just easier for me to make comments on and edit and mark up. And then I'll return them to you within sort of a week or so with my comments and feedback, and a rubric attached as well. So on the course homepage you can find the rubric and a checklist of all the kind of items that you might look for in your paper, and just double check that you've included all those things. So let's talk a little bit about these essay prompts. You're going to pick one of them, and then you're going to have to narrow it down even further from what I've given you here. So The first one, symbolism in literature refers to an object, person, or situation that has a deeper meaning. Discuss animal symbolism in one or more of the following texts. And then I've given you some options here. William Blake's The Lamb, William Blake's The Tiger, Perrault's Little Red Riding Hood, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, or Aesop's The Lion and the Mouse. Okay, so if you were going to pick this essay question, you would have to narrow it down. And your thesis statement would be identifying the name of the text that you're doing, the author's full name, first and last name, and then you could also, if you wanted, identify the genre. So is this a poem? Is this a fairy tale? Is this a fable? So you have all those three types listed here, but you want to really narrow it down. And I would recommend you pick one or two at most. If you're trying to do too much, your argument might get a little too complicated, and you might just have too much to say within that word count. If you find yourself with a lack of, you have a lot of words, and you don't, you want to keep going, you can add another text and sort of just keep your analysis add to it. So make sure you have enough to talk about, but don't overwhelm your paper with too many things either. So depending on if you have a lot to say or a little to say, I guess. And then your thesis statement is going to identify that information. So you could start by saying, in Samuel Taylor's Coleridge's poem, Rime of the Ancient Mariner, animal symbolism is used through the depiction of the albatross. So something like that could be the start of a thesis, but you maybe want to go into what does that albatross symbolize in that poem. So you might bring up, some of the things we've talked about in lectures. It's a symbol of nature. It's a symbol of man trying to conquer nature. It's a symbol of loving all creatures, all these things like that. So you could just really elaborate on how you interpret that symbol in that poem. And you could build on, maybe try to find 3 arguments, 3 ideas. That's sort of the easiest way to do it in terms of structuring a paper. You have 3 body paragraphs. You could have 3 different points you want to make and have those listed in your thesis statement. If you have more than 3 points, you can have 4 points. You just want to make sure you're conveying your ideas very clearly and that your thesis statement and your introduction matches up with what you are going to argue in the rest of your paper. If you wanted, you could compare. So you could say William Blake uses animal symbolism in his poems The Lamb and the Tiger. Through animal symbols, he conveys the theme of whatever, of conflict between 2 aspects of human nature. I don't know, whatever it is you want to express. So especially for some of the shorter texts like Aesop's The Lion and the Mouse, you might want to compare it with another one of these texts, or even look at that database. There's the fairy tale database, but there's the Aesop's Tales database that you can click on the link here and find another allegorical fable that you could compare them to. So with a compare essay, you might want to, find the similarities, talk about the differences between them, or focus particularly just on the animals that are represented in those fables and explain what they represent. Second question, so allegorical stories have a hidden meaning or moral that is conveyed through the narrative. discuss the animal allegory in one or more of the following texts: Charles Perrault's Little Red Riding Hood, Aesop's The Lion and the Mouse, or Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So for these ones, it's probably beneficial if you watch those lectures where I talked about allegory and sort of how there could be a layered meaning. So Little Red Riding Hood, we talked about a little bit about the connotations of the sexual nature of the fairy tale, how the wolf is really representing a sort of a male figure, a predator, or even just an evil presence as well. Aesop's The Lion and the Mouse, we talked about the allegorical levels of that as well, where you have the regal lion and then the mouse, which is sort of representative of a lower class, and how there is sort of representing sort of the value and purpose of the lower class, and how they also have a meaning and purpose in the civilization where this tale was originally told. And then we have Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. We talked a lot about the religious allegory that was embedded in that poem, but you could also talk about it as a sort of ecological or environmental allegory about taking care of nature and nurturing the natural world and respecting nature. Or you could talk about, the albatross as a kind of Jesus figure, or, you could really add your own interpretations there as well. So yeah, I do want you to sort of explain the layers of meaning that you can read into those texts. And you might just pick one of them, or you could do more than one, but in most cases, like Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, you would want to just focus on that one because it is rather a dense poem. Number 3, compare and contrast Perrault's Little Red Riding Hood with another animal fairy tale of your choosing. Discuss similar themes, ideas, patterns, symbolism, and literary devices. So you wouldn't have to do all of that. Your thesis would have to narrow that down probably. So you might say Little Red Riding Hood and another fairy tale, say The Frog Prince. Both are using animals as a sort of stand-in for a romantic male partner. The wolf is sort of more of a predator, whereas the frog is kind of the lowly animal, the lowly, I guess, homely husband that this princess is forced to marry. So you could talk about, similar ideas or patterns that you see in those fairy tales, or just try to analyze the symbolism of those animals being represented. Even something like, Three Little Pigs or Cinderella does have sort of animal characters in them, so you could sort of deconstruct some of those animal fairy tales as well if you chose that one. And then number 4, compare and contrast any 2 or more of Aesop's fables and discuss the similar themes, patterns, symbolism, or other literary devices used in the fable genre. Yeah, so you can go to Aesop's Tales database, find another fable that you are familiar with. Tortoise and the Hare, for example, is another very commonly familiar tale for a lot of people. And so you're going to sort of, maybe you'll discuss The Lion and the Mouse, maybe you'll discuss The Tortoise and the Hare, and you'll kind of contrast those 2 fables. So your thesis could be something like, in Aesop's fables, he uses animals to convey a moral lesson to his audience. And then you could identify what those morals are and go into sort of analyzing each fable specifically. That's one way you could do it. You could just focus just on the animals and say, in Aesop's fables, he uses animals to convey certain ideas about human nature. For example, he uses a hare, a rabbit, and a lion to convey arrogance, or something like that. So you can kind of use compare and contrast to sort of really develop your argument and frame your thesis statement as a kind of answer or interpretation of those texts. And then the last one was expanding any one of the discussion questions in the lectures into your own essay topic. So this one's a little bit more loosey-goosey. You get to really devise your own thesis and go off on your kind of own tangent in relation to any one of those texts that we looked at this unit. Other than that, I would just expect you to, do your best, make sure you're using quotations from those texts in your essay, and make sure you also include that works cited page as well. So good luck with this one, and if you have any questions, you can email me. Other than that, I would use the resources on the course homepage. I've sort of made 2 pages, one explaining thesis statements, another one discussing how to incorporate quotations into your essay. There's some other resources that you can find at the bottom of the course homepage that just sort of go into more essay writing technical stuff. And also look at that checklist too. It gives you a little bit more guidance in what your paper is supposed to look like in terms of, adding a title and putting page numbers in, and all that kind of formatting stuff that is also important.